Vortex shield. Critical damage. Tripwire may be useful to deter threats. Laser core ready. Hostile down. Firing laser core. Warning. Rear reactor damage sustained. Reactor exposed.
Victory can still be ours. Keep fighting.
Friendly Titan attacking your target. Critical damage. Take cover. Friendly Titan attacking your target. Friendly Titan down. Core ready. Enemy Titan eliminated. Warning, heavy damage sustained. You are engaging multiple Titans. Recommend vortex shield. Ion laser core activated. Warning, sustained severe reactor damage. Multiple Titans are engaging you. I recommend targeting the closest enemy first. Critical damage. Utilize tripwire. Friendly Titan attacking your
You are
target.
winning this battle. Keep fighting, pilot.
Elevated threat condition. Multiple Titans attacking. Ion laser core activated. Friendly Titan attacking your target. Warning, reactor is vulnerable. Severe damage occurred. Friendly Titan down. Warning, reactor exposed. Severe damage sustained. Pilot, we are outnumbered 2 to 1. prioritize your target. Critical damage. Take cover. Target destroyed. Impressive shot.
Vulnerable.
Enemy Titans. Fighter in basic order. Warning. Reactor exposed. Protective casing compromised. Enemy Titan eliminated.
You are winning this battle. Keep fighting, pilot.
Friendly Titan attacking your target. You are outnumbered by hostile Titans. You are being engaged by multiple Titans. Friendly Titan attacking your target. Warning, critical damage sustained.
saying that Deadspin staffers had nothing to do with the new changes, with the New York Times also reporting that 2 sources with knowledge of the situation said that Maidment was in direct control of Deadspin yesterday. That same day, we also saw senior editor Diana Moskovitz announce that she put in her 2 weeks notice, saying on Twitter what happened today and everything that preceded it are among the reasons I decided to move on. But then also, in response to all of this, we saw Maidment say in a statement, "I sent a memo to Deadspin staff stating that our sports site should be focused on sports coverage. As I made clear in that note, sport touches on nearly every aspect of life, from politics to business to pop culture and more. We believe that Deadspin reporters and editors should go after every conceivable story as long as it has something to do with sports. We are sorry that some of the Deadspin staff don't agree with that editorial direction and refuse to work within that incredibly broad mandate." But notably, here we also saw a response from Will Leach, who is actually the founder of Deadspin, with him saying the only way you could buy Deadspin and say, here are some edicts and now everyone follow them, is if you never read Deadspin in the last 10 years. It feels like they are either trying to kill the site and squeeze whatever money they can out of it, or get rid of the entire staff. Or both, because there's no sense they have any plan. But yeah, ultimately we're gonna have to wait to see what happens next, if more people leave, if there are more firings. I mean, I also went to deadspin.com and it appears that some of those concourse articles are on kind of the first page if you scroll. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how this plays out. And the last thing we're going to talk about today is this massive news coming out of Bolivia. If you haven't seen, protests have been going on all over the country for over a week now, but unlike some of the recent protests that we've talked about in Latin America and other parts of the world, these protests aren't because of economic problems. Instead, we're seeing protests over accusations of election fraud. Okay, so all of this starts on October 20th when voters in Bolivia head to the polls to cast their votes. Votes for either President Evo Morales or his opponents, the strongest of which was Carlos Mesa, who actually himself had served as president from 2003 until 2005 when he resigned. Now, Morales has served as president of Bolivia for more than 13 years, since 2006, making him one of the longest serving leaders in Latin America. And so in this most recent election, he was running to be re-elected for his 4th term. And right now, you might be thinking, okay, 13 years, 4 terms, that sounds like a long time for a democratically elected president to serve. And in fact, it is, or rather was, because back in 2013, Bolivia's highest court ruled that Morales could run for a 3rd term, even though the Constitution limited the president to 2 5-year terms. And so he ran that 3rd time, and he won. And then in 2016, Morales proposed a change to the Constitution that would end term limits altogether. But in a national referendum, a majority of Bolivian voters voted against his plan to scrap the term limits, thus preventing him from running again in 2019. Now, Morales originally said that he would accept that outcome, but then in 2017, his party asked the highest court to overrule the referendum, arguing that preventing elected officials from running indefinitely, 1, violated human rights, and 2, that the referendum only passed in the first place because of a smear campaign led by the United States. And again, we ended up seeing the court give Morales a huge win by scrapping the limits entirely, officially allowing him to run for a 4th term. Now, unsurprisingly, that decision upset a lot of people who argue that this was a clear tactic for Morales to solidify his hold on power. And now those allegations have resurfaced because when the polls closed on the night of October 20th, the results from Bolivia's election tribunal indicated that the race was headed to a runoff that analysts said that Morales had a strong chance of losing. But then the tribunal mysteriously stopped updating the election results for nearly 24 hours. And then when reporting finally resumed after this just unexplained gap, it showed that Morales was actually beating Mesa in a razor-thin margin. And then a few days later, the tribunal declares that not only did Morales win, but that he had won by just a little bit over the 10-point lead required to avoid a runoff election. So unsurprisingly, you had a lot of people confused, a lot of people pissed off. You had Mesa and other opposition leaders accusing Morales of election fraud, calling for people to hold demonstrations against the election outcome. And speaking to CNN last Monday, Mesa said, quote, "What is happening in Bolivia is a gigantic fraud to rob us of our right to go to a second round where we have a chance of winning. We are talking about a clearly established fraud by a government that has the Electoral Council at its service." And so with this, we saw people taking to the streets all over the country to protest. And while some of the demonstrations have remained peaceful, other protesters have reportedly set fire to government buildings and knocked over statues. These protests have also basically been ongoing ever since the election, with protesters building barricades and blocking highways and buildings, also causing shops and schools to close down. In the capital yesterday, we saw police responding by firing tear gas at protesters, and numerous injuries have been reported all over the country. But what's also really interesting is it isn't just people protesting against Morales. In fact, a lot of the clashes and violence that we're seeing at these protests are actually between Mesa's supporters and Morales supporters. And in fact, on Monday, there were both Mesa and Morales held rallies where they each accused the other supporters of inciting violence. Also at his rally, Mesa doubled down on the fraud accusations, also telling Reuters earlier in the day that his protesters would not stop or accept negotiation and that the crisis was caused entirely because Morales wanted to stay in power for his lifetime, adding, "I have no doubt that his intention is to stay in government indefinitely, illegitimately. This is a political process that is debasing, deteriorating, and corrupting, that is expressed by the desire for power's sake." But on the other side of this, you have Morales continuing to affirm his victory and and deny any accusations that any fraud occurred or that he is simply trying to keep himself in power, arguing that his continued election wins are the will of the Bolivian people. Morales has also claimed that there is a coup attempt underway led by right-wing groups and foreign powers, but we've also seen him invite the Organization of American States, the OAS, to audit the vote, and saying if the OAS finds evidence of fraud, he'll agree to a second round of voting. In the meantime, the United States, Argentina, Brazil, and Colombia have refused to formally recognize Morales as the rightful president of Bolivia following the election, and in a joint statement, the four countries said that they will not recognize him if the OAS is not able to verify results of the first round. Which, actually a big update today, is Bolivia's foreign minister announced that the OAS audit is set to start tomorrow and that the results will be binding. As far as what the OAS has had to say thus far, I've seen them call the 24-hour gap in election reporting surprising and worrying, also saying that Bolivian authorities didn't have a legitimate explanation for it. We've already seen the OAS Director of Electoral Observation and Cooperation saying that this election should still go to a second round regardless of the audit's finding. But yeah, ultimately that is where we are with Bolivia now. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. You know, with this situation, you have many comparing Morales' actions to what's going on in Venezuela right now. You know, as the Washington Post wrote, the developments in some ways resemble the sequence of events that led to the current standoff in Venezuela. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, a Morales ally, claimed victory last year in elections widely viewed as fraudulent. The United States withdrew recognition of Maduro, declared opposition leader Juan Guaido Venezuela's rightful leader, and imposed economic sanctions on the already collapsing nation. And in fact, on that note, thousands of protesters who have taken to the streets in Bolivia can often be heard chanting slogans such as "No and no, I don't want to live in a dictatorship like the one in Venezuela." But that's one of the big differences between Maduro and Morales is that Morales is actually still pretty popular. While Maduro is widely blamed for Venezuela's economic crisis, Morales is often widely credited for bringing massive economic growth to Bolivia and significantly reducing poverty and inequality in one of the region's poorest countries. But also, at the same time, Morales' once very strong popularity has slipped recently, with more and more people accusing him of weakening democracy and concentrating power with his continued efforts to change the constitution to be re-elected. For now, we'll have to wait and see. For those that live there, live around there, have family there, I'd really love to know your thoughts on what's happening. And that's where I'm going to end today's show. If you're new here and you want an easy and hopefully enjoyable way to stay informed, be sure you hit that subscribe button. Definitely tap that bell to turn on notifications. Also, if you're looking for more to watch after this video, you should definitely check out that new podcast I have with Jack's Films, and or maybe just miss yesterday's show. You can click or tap right there to watch either of those. But with that said, of course, as always, my name's Philip DeFranco. You've just been filled in. I love yo faces, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Prioritize your targets. Enemy Titan attacking your targets, or engaging multiple Titans. Recommend Vortex Shield. Enemy Titan destroyed. You are outnumbered by hostile enemies. Target. Enemy Titan down. Friendly pilot attacking the target.
You are the only Titan left. It's up to you, pilot.
Guard mode activated. Transferring controls to manual operation. Ion laser core activated.
I admire your moves, pilot.
Warning, critical damage. Advise taking cover. Warning, hostile pilot uncalled. Hostile pilot KIA. Elevated threat condition. Multiple Titans attacking. Eject. Pilot mode online. Titan down. Pilot attacking the target. Outnumbered 2-1. Multiple Titans are engaging you. I recommend targeting the closest enemy first.
Your opponent should stay out of your way. 2 kills. Well done, pilot.
Warning, hostile pilot on board.
Halftime.
It is good you returned safely, pilot.
Destroy all enemy Titans.
Friendly Titan attacking your target. Multiple Titans engaged. Advise you prioritize your target. Enemy Titan eliminated. Multiple Titans are engaging you. I recommend targeting the closest enemy first. Ejecting.
Titan defeated. Impressive work, pilot.
Pilot on board. Welcome back.
We are winning, but not by much, pilot. Focus, fight, and win.
Or outnumbered by hostile Titans. Outnumbered 2-1. Defensive option. Tripwire lines. We're being engaged by multiple Titans.
Engaging multiple Titans.
Splitter rifle may exceed operational limits.